The Tailor. By 2073, the Earth had stopped pretending. The biome was past saving, and everyone with a functioning cortex knew it. The models had converged, the last hopeful graphs had flattened, and the species had quietly relocated its ambition off-world, the way a family stops repainting a house they have already decided to leave. There was a generation coming up that found this thrilling. They studied orbital agronomy and dreamed of red dust, and called themselves the first true children of the void, and good for them. For everyone else, the news settled into the bones as a low and permanent ache. Whatever you built here would be buried here. Whatever you were would not be remembered, because the rememberers were leaving, and the archive was a dying rock. This produced a very particular kind of quiet in people, not despair exactly. Despair has a shape, a direction, an object. This was flatter than that. A man would stand at a window 40 floors up, watch the brown haze swallow a sunset that no longer obeyed any natural law, and feel nothing he could name. The word the therapists used, before therapists too became a luxury good, was ennui. The word the streets used was the flat. The ones who could afford to push back against the flat did so with their bodies, because their bodies were the last frontier left that anyone could actually reach. You could not tour a dying world without choking on it. You could not hoard objects that were all destined for the same heap, but you could open the human animal up like a watch and improve the movement. Genetic work, cybernetic work, the splicing of the two, it boomed past every law written to contain it, and the laws stayed on the books the way scripture stays in a drawer, consulted by no one. The wealthy turned inward and downward, into sensation, into augmentation, into the long, warm dark of the flesh, and out of that turning a new thing was being born, not a posthuman thing, something stranger. A new and provisional answer to a question the species had assumed was settled 40,000 years ago. The question was, what is a person? The city did not care about the question. The city only sold the answers. It rose in two layers, like most things did now. The upper skin of it gleamed towers of self-cleaning glass, transit threads strung between them like the work of a luminous spider, advertisements that knew your retinal signature and adjusted their promises accordingly. Beneath that skin, the city rotted in the old human way, in alleys and sublevels, and the warrens between the load-bearing dreams of the rich. The deeper you cut, the more honest it got. August shops with their hand-lettered guarantees. Sensory dens exhaling cold blue light and the smell of ozone and sweat. People with too many eyes, people with no faces at all, people wearing skins that did not match the way they moved, which was the first sign, if you knew how to read it, that the person inside was not the person who owned the door. Through one such alley, on a Tuesday that meant nothing yet, a man named Travis was walking where his phone told him to walk. The instructions came in encrypted bursts, each one dissolving a few seconds after he read it, and Travis followed them the way a tourist follows a guide in a country whose language he does not speak, with total dependence and a thin, constant fear. Left at the noodle stall. He turned left at the noodle stall, past the MOD shop. Do not look at the third camera. He did not look at the third camera, which of course made him desperately aware of the third camera, a black hemisphere bolted under a dripping awning, swiveling on its little motor to watch him not watch it. He was sweating through a very expensive shirt. He had been told to come alone, and he had come alone, and the aloneness had a texture he had not anticipated, a sense that the whole filthy luminous maze had been arranged specifically around his single body, that he was the only real thing in it, and everything else was a mechanism for observing him. He had wanted this. He reminded himself of that. He had paid a great deal to want this. The text walked him through a knot of streets that seemed designed to disorient, doubling back, descending, climbing again, and then, without any transition that his nervous system registered as meaningful, he came out of the dark and into light, real light. The financial district stood up around him all at once, clean and vertical and indifferent. The change was so total that he stopped walking and simply stood, blinking, a man surfacing too fast. Good, said the phone, now home. He almost laughed. The arrow on the screen was pointing at his own building. He crossed the plaza he crossed every morning. The doors read him and opened. In the lobby, a receptionist he had never once spoken to looked up and said, "Good evening, Mr. Cole," with a warmth that made the back of his neck crawl, because she had never called him anything, because he was a tenant and not a man to her, and tonight someone had told her his name. He nodded, not trusting his voice. The elevator already knew his floor. Of course it did. It was his floor. His own office door stood at the end of the hall, and in front of it, leaning against the wall with a large steel case at his feet and a grin spreading across his soft face, was Edmund. "There he is," Edmund said. "There's the man of the hour." "Ed," Travis stopped a few feet short. "What are you doing here? What is this? Why am I being routed through every back alley in the district to my own office?" "Open the door," Edmund said, "and I'll tell you everything, promise." They sat, Travis behind his own desk, which felt obscurely important, a claiming of ground, and Edmund across from him with the steel case laid flat on his knees. "First," Edmund said, "the runaround, I know, it feels insane, but the man you want to meet doesn't take meetings the way other people take meetings. He wanted you somewhere you'd feel safe, your turf, your building, your chair, and he wanted to watch you come in, to be sure you came alone. He's very, very careful, Trav. That's the whole reason he's still breathing, and the whole reason he's worth what he costs." "You said a name on the call, you said." "The Tailor," Edmund said it the way you say the name of a saint or a disease. "Yeah." "And he's where?" Getting to that, Edmund thumbed the latches. The case opened on a recessed terminal, a screen and a folded antenna and a bank of inputs that did not correspond to any consumer standard Travis recognized. Edmund extended the antenna, typed a string of access codes with the unhurried competence of a man who had done it many times, and then reached up and pressed 2 fingers to the back of his own neck. Beneath the skin there, in a neat row, a sequence of small lights woke and ran through their colors. It looked absurdly like the face of a wireless router, that humble blinking liturgy from the early century, except that it was happening under the surface of a living man's skin, the light diffusing pink through the flesh. "Travis," Edmund said, "meet the Tailor." The last light went green. What happened then was almost nothing, and the almost nothing was the most frightening thing Travis had ever seen. Edmund did not slump or shudder or roll his eyes back. There was no theater. It was subtler and far worse than theater. It was as if a man standing in a familiar room had, between one blink and the next, been replaced by a different man wearing the first man's clothes, and using the first man's body with a fluency the first man had never possessed. The slack went out of Edmund's posture. The grin, Edmund's grin, that wet, eager, faintly stupid grin Travis had known for 15 years, simply ceased to exist, and the face it left behind was alert in a way Edmund's face had never been. The thing in Edmund's body took a single unhurried glance around the office, the way a man checks his surroundings on stepping off a train, locating exits, reading the room, coming awake with its eyes already open. "Mr. Cole," it said. The voice was Edmund's and was not. The instrument was the same throat, the same resonant chambers, but it was being played by someone who actually knew the instrument. The vowels had edges. The consonants landed where they were aimed. "You can call me the Tailor," it said. "That's all you need and all I'll give you." Why? Travis's mouth was dry. Why that name? "Because of the adjustments I make, a small, precise smile, to each of my suits." "What suits?" "The skin ones, Mr. Cole." Travis became aware that he was gripping the arms of his chair. In the body across the desk, the body that was supposed to be his oldest friend, something looked back at him with an intelligence that did not belong there, and Travis heard himself say, like a child, "How do I know this isn't just Ed, playing a this could be a joke? Ed does this. Ed thinks this kind of thing is funny." "Edmund Vane," the Tailor said, "did not earn the fortune you assume he earned. He inherited it. Zinc, his family's holdings, dull as ditchwater for 2 generations until biotech discovered that ionic cellular bonding likes zinc the way a body likes salt, at which point the price did something vertical and Edmund became, through no act of his own, a wealthy man. He has never read a book to its end. He believes he is charming. He is not charming. He is rich, which produces in the people around him a behavior he has mistaken his whole life for charm. The smile again. Shall I go on, or shall I do something Edmund could not? It picked up a pen off the desk. It began idly to move it across the knuckles of Edmund's clumsy hand, a coin walk but with a pen, the kind of small dexterity that takes 1,000 hours, and Edmund's thick fingers performed it perfectly. Then it tossed the pen up, caught it, and with no change of expression reversed its grip so that the pen was held the way you hold a thing you intend to drive through cartilage, the point oriented at the soft hollow beneath the jaw. Travis understood with a cold lurch that the body across from him had just become, in the space of a breath, an efficient instrument for killing him, and that the only thing between him and that was the will of whatever was wearing his friend. Then the pen was just a pen again, set gently back on the blotter. Travis was convinced. "Ground rules," the tailor said, "because you've clearly never done this, and the ones who have never done it are the ones who get hurt by their own assumptions." Travis nodded. He had a translation app open under the desk, and over the next several minutes the tailor would, without being asked, drift through 6 languages with native accents, a clause of Cantonese, a line of Hungarian, something liquid and consonantal that the app flagged as a Berber dialect it could only partially parse. And each time Travis checked, the accent was perfect, not the flattened competence of a learning model, but the lived music of a mouth that had grown up making those sounds. Except no mouth had grown up making all of them. That was the point. The tailor was demonstrating, gently, the breadth of what it could pour into a borrowed skull. "When I'm inside you," it said, "your memories are yours. They stay yours. Every implant on the market has a sealed partition, a black box for the load-bearing parts of a self, your name, your dead, the things that would unmake you if they were taken. I cannot reach those. No one can, short of your own consent or, a small pause, a genuine emergency, theoretically, under protocols nobody sane invokes. You'll remember none of the job itself. While I'm driving, you'll be down in the dark under your own surface, hibernating. Most people describe it afterward as a dream they can't quite catch. You'll be safe down there. No harm can come to a mind while its body lives and the tether holds. That's the whole physics of it. That's why I can walk into a stranger and walk back out into myself without leaving anything of me behind. And if the tether breaks, then you want to already be home," said lightly, moved past. "Your implant is illegal, by the way. Front lobe interface, full motor, strictly contraband. I won't ask why you have one. It's nothing to me. I'll only point out that the officers who'd theoretically arrest you for it are wearing the same hardware, which is why no one has enforced that particular statute since before your daughter was born. The risk to you is real and small. It stays small as long as we draw no attention. Attention is the one thing I never do. It's the opposite of my entire profession." "How do I know," Travis said, "that you'll give the body back?" The thing in Edmund laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of it, and it was awful to watch Edmund's face do something so unlike Edmund. "Mr. Cole, don't flatter yourself." It spread Edmund's hands. "Of every body I've worn, and I've worn a great many, yours would not place in the top 200. I have no use for your life. I have use for your money. That's a far more reliable thing to trust than affection or honor. Those can curdle, but a man who wants to be paid again behaves himself. And I sign every contract with a third party watching, a broker I trust, precisely so that you never have to trust me. I'll do whatever you need, Mr. Cole, provided the number's right, with one exception." The smile went out. "I don't kill. If you want a man dead, there are people who jump into bodies and do exactly that, and they're not hard to find, and they're not me. Understand the difference now, so you don't insult me later by forgetting it. And if I want to go ahead, then the contract stays with Edmund. When you're ready, he sends the terms to my broker. You'll deal with the broker, never with me directly, and you'll never see my face." It stood in Edmund's body and buttoned Edmund's jacket with a neatness Edmund had never once managed. "Hundreds of clients before you, Mr. Cole, not one disappointed. That's not a sales line. It's a load-bearing fact of my survival. A disappointed client talks." It flipped the pen one last time, an offering, and laid it pointing toward Travis across the desk. And then Edmund was back. It was the same near nothing in reverse, a small collapse, a softening, the grin flooding back up into the face like water finding its level, and Edmund blinked and looked around with the mild confusion of a man who had nodded off in church and said, "So, what do you think?" and reached for the pen and fumbled it, and it rolled off the desk onto the floor. Travis watched it roll. He thought, "That is the man I have known for 15 years, and he could not in that moment have said which of the two of them frightened him more. The dinner party was on the 90th floor of a building that did not officially have a 90th floor, and the tailor arrived inside a body that turned heads. It was not Travis's body. The cold job was a week behind now, filed and paid. The corporate data lifted from Travis's rivals had been worth, in the end, rather more than Travis had paid for it, which was the kind of asymmetry the tailor noted and never mentioned. Tonight's vessel belonged to a man named Sennett, a minor heir who had sold the tailor 8 hours of his life for a sum that would clear his more pressing debts. And Sennett was tall and graceful, and had the bones that the rich breed for, and the tailor wore him like a tailored thing, which after all was the entire point of the name. He moved through the party the way a current moves through a room of moored boats. He did not work the crowd reoriented around him. He stepped into a conversation about the Lagrange settlements and within 90 seconds had corrected, with surgical courtesy, a fund manager's misunderstanding of the helium economics, leaving the man laughing at his own error and somehow grateful for the correction. He took a flute of something that cost more than a sub-level family ate in a year and did not drink it. He let a woman named Halloran put her hand on Sennett's forearm and tell him he was the only interesting person she'd met all season. He agreed with her warmly in a way that made it a joke they were both in on. She laughed, her pupils widened, and somewhere in the warm theater of that exchange his other hand was 4 inches from her clutch. The clutch held her device. The device held the encrypted ledgers of a man the tailor's client very much wished to ruin. "You're showing off," said a voice in his ear, dry, caustic, bored in the specific way of a person who is never actually bored. "I'm working," the tailor subvocalized, the words shaped below the threshold of Sennett's audible breath. "You're working and showing off. I can see your heart rate. You like this part." "Is it done, Rez?" "It's done 3 seconds ago while you were busy being the most charming zinc magnate's money in the room. Their whole side of the table copied clean, including 2 ledgers your client didn't pay for, which you're welcome to because I'm generous and you're going to owe me." A pause. "She's going to remember you, by the way. Halloran, you laid it on thick." "She'll remember Sennett. She'll remember the way Sennett was tonight, which isn't the way Sennett is any other night. And one day those 2 impressions are going to sit next to each other in her head and not fit." Rez's voice carried under its needling the genuine professional irritation of a craftsman watching another craftsman take a risk. "That's how people like us get found, not the hack, the performance." "Noted," said the tailor, who had heard it before, and did the thing anyway, because the truth Rez would never say aloud, and the tailor would never admit was that the performance was the only part of any of it that felt like being alive. He delivered the punchline of a joke he had deployed 40 times in 40 bodies. A joke engineered over years for maximum reliable laughter, a small machine for manufacturing the goodwill of strangers, and the table broke open with delight. And in the warm noise of it the tailor smiled Sennett's expensive smile and felt the familiar nothing underneath, the flat that even he was not immune to, the cold clean void that all the borrowed brilliance in the world only ever decorated and never filled. Eli met him on a terrace where the air was filtered enough to be almost cold, almost like the air in the old films, and handed him the second half of the payment in the form of a single anonymous credit shard. "Clean," Eli said, "as always." "As always." They stood at the rail. Below them the city did its 2-layered shimmer, gold on top and a deep restless dark beneath, and Eli looked out at it with the expression he always wore looking at it, a man at the edge of a country he refused on principle to enter. Here was the strange fact of their friendship, and it was a real friendship, perhaps the realest the tailor had. In all their years Eli had never seen the tailor's true face. He had met him in 100 bodies and brokered him into 100 more. The man behind the bodies remained, to Eli, a voice and a reputation and a set of habits, a presence as faceless as the city's own. It did not seem to trouble Eli. Very little troubled Eli, who had made a calm fortune at the edge of an industry he found repugnant. The way a man might grow wealthy supplying a war he personally believed to be a sin. "You're one of the last, you know," the tailor said in Sennett's voice, which would not be Sennett's voice for very much longer. "Naturals, completely unedited. There's a museum somewhere that should be collecting you." "There's not enough money on this dying rock," Eli said comfortably, "to put a single wire in my head, not one. I'll go out of this world with the brain I came into it with, thank you, exactly as God or the random churn of matter saw fit to issue it." He sipped his drink. which doesn't mean I won't take a healthy percentage off the men who feel otherwise. A man can disapprove of the ocean and still sell umbrellas. That's the most coherent ethics I've heard all night. I'm a coherent man, it's my one feature. Eli turned from the rail. Oh, before I forget, and I nearly did, which would have been a shame. There's a thing tonight. Came in late, came in quiet, came in asking for you specifically, which doesn't happen often and always interests me when it does. He named a sum that made even the tailor's borrowed eyebrows lift. Discreet, personal. The client wants you, your touch, your trust, nothing corporate. I think, and here Eli smiled, because he knew his friend, as well as a man can know a faceless one. I think it might be right up your alley. The tailor looked out at the dark underside of the gold. Send it over, he said. The cab smelled of synthetic pine, and the cabbie would not stop talking. And I says to him, you can't put a meter on a man's time, not really. Time's the one thing they keep making less of and charging more for, am I right? You follow what I'm saying? Course you do, you got an honest face, I can always tell. 40 years driving, you learn to read a fella in the mirror inside of a block. The cabbie's eyes found the rear view. You got somewhere to be, friend, or somewhere to forget. Those are the only two fares I ever carry, which is yours. The body in the back seat registered to a man named Galvin, leased for the evening through 3 cutouts so that even Eli did not have the full chain, said nothing. The tailor was busy inside it, running the pre-job checklist he ran in every new vessel: range of motion, pain baseline, the small inventory of a stranger's flesh. Galvin's left knee was bad. Galvin's heart skipped, very slightly, every 11th beat. The tailor logged these the way a pilot logs weather and went on. Forget then, the cabbie decided when no answer came. That's all right, no judgment in this cab. This cab's a confessional with a meter. He laughed at his own line, pleased with it. The motel slid up out of the dark ahead, a low, sad rectangle of rooms that rented by the hour to one specific appetite, its sign half dead, its lot empty but for the long shadows. The cab stopped. Here we are, place of forgetting. The cabbie's eyes in the mirror, for just a moment, did not match the warmth of his voice. You take care now, friend, real good care. The tailor paid in Galvin's money and got out, and did not look back, and so did not see the cabbie sit a moment in the empty lot watching the door of room 9, before pulling slowly away. She opened the door before he knocked, and the revulsion the tailor had been wearing on Galvin's face, the involuntary distaste of a fastidious mind in a coarse body, in a coarse place, dropped away all at once and became, against his own deeper habits, a smile. You, he said. Me, said Sandy. She stood in the doorway in something that was barely there, the room's bad light behind her, and she was beautiful in the body she was wearing tonight. But the tailor had learned long ago to look past the body for the person at the controls, and the person at the controls was Sandy, was unmistakably Sandy, in the particular way she stood and the particular way she let the silence run. They traded the codes. They always traded the codes. In a world where the face was a rented thing, the only proof of identity left was a shared secret spoken between 2 people who had agreed on it in advance. The tailor gave her his half and she gave him hers, and the small ritual settled them both. I am who you think I am, you are who I think you are, and tonight at least we are not strangers wearing the dead. Client wanted me natural, Sandy said, stepping back to let Galvin's body in. No driver, just me in here awake. She closed the door. I took the job on one condition, that it was you in the other chair, nobody else. I don't do present for just anyone. It's the perk of the work, isn't it? The tailor said, not having to be there. It's the whole perk. You rent the skin out, you go down in the dark, you wake up and it's tomorrow, and you're a little richer and a little cleaner than the people who do it the old way. She sat on the edge of the cheap bed. Being present is harder. Being present, you keep all of it. She looked up at him. I wanted to keep this one. Then I'll make it worth keeping, the tailor said, as much as I in this regrettable knee can manage, and she laughed, and the laugh was real, and across the room in the closet behind a slatted door, a small camera the tailor had already clocked and decided to ignore when on recording everything, its single eye unblinking in the dark. Afterward they lay in the bad light and the tailor did 2 things with the unhurried economy of long practice. He reached up and pressed a point at Galvin's temple, and the camera's audio feed went dead. Not the video. He couldn't kill the video from here without a fuss the client would notice. But the audio, the words, those he could take back. And he toggled a second thing, deeper, an internal switch that quieted the part of him that was always performing, always tailoring, always watching the room, and for a little while he let himself simply be the man underneath. It was the closest thing he had to coming home. "You go away somewhere," Sandy said into his shoulder. Every time I can feel it. The whole rest of you is right here, and then there's this one room you walk out of." "Old habits." "Tell me one true thing," she said. "Off the clock. We're off the clock now. I turned my meter off an hour ago." She propped herself up. "You know how I can do this. Be present, I mean, not fracture. Most walkers can't take more than a few jobs awake before their head starts to come apart at the seams. The rejection, the immune thing, the mind deciding the body it's in is a wound. I've got a knack for it. I've always wondered if you've got the same knack, or a better one, because you do more of this than anyone alive and you're still in there. So, one true thing. How?" The tailor was quiet for a moment. Then, because it was Sandy, because the audio was dead and the deeper switch was thrown, and the flat had loosened its grip the way it only ever did in this one room, he told her. "My mother was an addict," he said, "before I was born. She needed money the way addicts need money, which is more than they need most things, and there was a trial paying well for pregnant subjects. A drug called Neuroprol. The pitch was higher brain function in the child, adaptability, plasticity, learning speed, a generation of little prodigies. The reality was that it killed 9 of every 10 of us in the womb, miscarriage. The other 10% it worked on. He studied the water-stained ceiling. I'm the 10%. God. It did what it promised for the survivors. My brain learns anything. Languages, dexterities, the feel of a new body. It adapts faster than it has any right to. But it did something they didn't predict, which is the only reason I have a profession at all. The same plasticity that lets me learn a skin in an hour is the thing that keeps me from fracturing in it. The rejection you're talking about, the fraying, a normal mind in a foreign body, is like a graft the flesh keeps trying to expel. My mind doesn't trigger the response. It fits anything. It thinks it belongs everywhere." A thin smile she couldn't see. "I can live as many lives as I want. It's the one gift in the whole catastrophe of me." Sandy was quiet, then, "And the one you're running from." The tailor went still. "There's a life in there you won't go near," she said gently, her hand flat on his chest. "I can feel that too. Everybody's got a room they keep locked. I just want to know it's there. I'm not asking you to open it tonight." For a long moment he said nothing, and the something in him that the whole architecture of his life existed to keep contained pressed, very slightly, against its door. "Alfred," he said at last. She waited. "That's the name, the real one, the one under all the others." He let out a slow breath. "You can call me Al, when we're off the clock, not the other thing, not in here, not with you." Sandy's face did something soft and undefended. "I'd like that," she said. "I'd like more time off the clock. That's all I ever wanted from you, you know, just the off the clock part." She kissed his jaw. "Thank you for the name, for trusting me with the—" And then she stopped. It was not a natural stopping. The tailor felt it before he understood it, the way you feel a dropped beat in a song you know by heart. Something went out of Sandy's face, some animating current, and her hands, which had been resting warm and idle, rose of their own accord and settled around her own throat and began to squeeze. "Sandy," he moved to take her wrists, and his body did not obey him. It was the most obscene sensation of his life, worse than any pain, the sudden discovery that the command had been sent and the limb had not answered, that the tether between his will and Galvin's flesh had been cut somewhere upstream of his knowing. He was a passenger. He screamed her name with a throat that would not make the sound. Across from him, 6 inches away, Sandy's eyes had gone wide and white and pleading, the small vessels in them blooming red and then bursting as the borrowed hands bore down. Behind the terror in her eyes was the worst thing of all, which was Sandy, still in there, still awake, still present the way she had wanted to be present, feeling every second of it. Galvin's body rose off the bed. The tailor, Alfred, watched it happen from inside, watched his own legs carry him across the room with a gait that was not his, watched his own hand reach down and slide open the drawer of the nightstand where, waiting, oiled, loaded, lay a revolver no one had told him was there. Galvin's hand closed around it. Galvin's thumb drew the hammer back. On the bed, the last light was going out of Sandy's eyes. He had to leave. It was the only thought that fit through the narrow channel of his panic. Get out, jump home, sever now. He reached for the escape code, the word that would tear his mind loose and send it screaming down the tether back to his own waiting body, and he found that his lips would not shape it. The same hand that held the gun was holding his voice. He could feel the muzzle now, cold against Galvin's temple, his own temple, the borrowed bone. He strained, everything he was, every adaptive miracle his mother's poison had built in him. He poured into the single act of making a mouth that was no longer his say one word. He blurted it out. The gun went off, and the world went black on the image of Sandy's body on the cheap motel floor, her hands still at her ruined throat, her eyes still open, still, he would carry this, still pleading at the dark. Alfred came awake in his own body, with the violence of a drowning man breaking the surface. The connection had severed in time. By a margin he did not want to measure, a tenth of a second, less his mind had come loose from Galvin's dying skull and shot home down the tether, and now he was here in his own flesh in his own dark room, and the array of screens before him showed nothing but static where the feed had been. The motel room was gone. Sandy was gone. There was only the snow of a dead signal, and the sound of his own breath sawing in and out of a chest that was shaking so hard the rifting pod creaked around him. He killed the security protocols with hands that barely worked. He pulled the leads from the ports at his neck and wrists and temple, each one coming free with a small wet click. He half fell out of the pod onto the floor and lay there a moment, just lay there, while the adrenaline of a death that had not quite been his own tried to find an exit from a body that hadn't been in danger and didn't know what to do with the chemistry. He fumbled a vial from the rack beside the pod, pressed the injector to his arm, and felt the relaxing agent go in cold and spread warm. And slowly, slowly, the sawing of his breath evened out into something a person could live inside. It was not every day that you experienced a near death in a borrowed body. He had, in all his years, only come close twice before, and never like this, never with someone he. He did not finish the thought. He sat up against the side of the pod and let himself, for the first time in longer than he could remember, simply be seen, by no one, by the dark, as exactly what he was. The real Alfred was a small man. That was the first thing, the thing the suits always erased. He was small, unnaturally so, a side effect of the neuroprol. His eyes were tired and they did not match, one a pale washed gray, the other a flat brown, heterochromatic, a defect logged in some abandoned trial database under his case number and never his name. A scar climbed his upper lip where a cleft palate had been stitched closed by an underfunded surgeon a long time ago. On his right hand, the smallest finger and the one beside it were fused to a single knuckle, webbed in their old original skin, so that the hand looked, in certain light, like something that had not finished being made. This was the body that every glittering, fluent, charming Tailor was cast back into. A small, broken, unfinished man in a dark room full of dead screens. The whole of his life's genius was a way of being anyone except this. And the one connection he had managed, in all of it, the one room he let himself walk into off the clock, the one person who had wanted Al and not the Tailor, was lying on a floor across the city with a revolver beside her and her killer's fingerprints, Galvin's fingerprints, which would read to any investigator as the fingerprints of the man the Tailor had been wearing, all over the gun. Someone had murdered Sandy through him. Someone had used his hands, his borrowed hands, and left the scene arranged so that the Tailor, so that Alfred would carry it. He let himself have the grief. He gave it a full minute, which was, by the brutal economy of the life he led, an extravagance. He thought of her face going soft when he said the name. He thought of off the clock. He let it move through him and did not look away, because looking away was a luxury that got people killed. When the minute was spent, he wiped his mismatched eyes with the back of his ruined hand, stood up, and began, in the cold, methodical part of himself that had kept him alive this long, to think about how he was going to survive. The bike was a filament of black graphene and stored lightning, and Alfred rode it the way he did everything in his own body, competently, painfully, and with none of the borrowed grace that made the Tailor a legend. He took it off autopilot 2 blocks from the rifting den. The grid wanted to drive for him, the way the grid wanted to drive everyone now, folding each vehicle into the great calm choreography of the traffic mind, and Alfred did not want to be choreographed tonight. He thumbed it to manual and felt the machine become dangerous under him, become his, and he cut down into the narrow capillaries of the lower city, where the auto-drive maps frayed into rumor, threading the bike through gaps that the traffic mind would have refused on principle, past noodle steam and the blue exhalations of the dens, the whole rotten luminous underworld smearing by at a speed that made his bad eyes water. He conned his way past the motel's security with a dead man's credentials and a manner he'd practiced, the bored authority of someone who belonged, and let himself into room 9. They were still there. Of course they were still there. Galvin's body, slumped against the nightstand where it had fallen, the revolver an arm's length from a hand that would never reach for anything again. And Sandy. He made himself look at Sandy, because not looking was another luxury, and because she deserved at least one person in the world who would not look away from what had been done to her. There was a third person in the room. A man in a featureless mask was crouched at the closet, working the small camera free of its mount. At the sound of the door, he came up fast and smooth, too smooth, a body driven by an expert, and he had the camera's storage core in one gloved fist. The recording on that core, Alpha understood instantly, was the only thing in the world that showed what had really happened in this room. The hands moving on their own, the will that was not Galvin's, the proof that the tailor had been a puppet and not a puppeteer. Alpha went for him. It was not a graceful fight. In his own small body, with his own bad knee that he'd been complaining about for years, Alpha fought the way a cornered animal fights, all leverage and dirty intention and no style. And for 3 seconds it was enough. He had a hand on the man's sleeve. He was a heartbeat from the core. The room filled with light. Spotlights, white and absolute, flooded through the thin curtains, and a voice through a megaphone told everyone inside to be still. The masked man took the half-second of Alpha's blindness and was gone through the bathroom window with the core gone clean. The light swung across the room and pinned Alpha where he stood over 2 corpses, with a killer's bike idling in the lot, and not one word of explanation that any officer alive would believe. Someone had tipped them off. Someone had timed it exactly, late enough for the masked man to recover the evidence, early enough to catch Alpha holding the scene. The same someone, he was already certain, who had taken Sandy away. He ran. He went out the same window the masked man had used and dropped into a service alley, and the cold truth of his own physiology arrived within 40 feet. He was winded. The tailor could run a marathon in a stolen body and feel nothing. Alpha, in the flesh his mother's chemistry had built, was gasping before he reached the mouth of the alley, his bad knee screaming, the fine tremor that lived always at the edges of him spreading up his arms. He was a brilliant mind in a failing machine. He had built an entire career out of escaping this exact body, and now the body was all he had, and it was not enough. He reached the bike, he threw a leg over it, fired it live, felt it surge. And an officer came around the corner of the alley still running, and kept running, alongside the accelerating bike, matching it, pacing a vehicle that should have left any human being standing. Alpha's mind, even in panic, did the arithmetic, and the arithmetic was wrong. No human ran like that. He risked one glance and saw, beneath the officer's calm and ordinary face, the wrongness of it. The face was a surface, a cladding, and behind the eyes there was a faint and steady glow that no living retina produced. He cut the bike hard left through a gap the synthetic could not follow and was gone. Behind him, the running thing slowed and stopped, and watched the dark swallow its quarry with the patience of a machine that has all the time there is. The synthetic's name was Tab, and he walked back to room 9 the way he did everything, without hurry and without waste. His partner was already inside. Danka stood over the bodies with the particular stillness of a homicide detective letting a scene speak, and she did not turn when Tab entered. She had long ago stopped performing reactions for his benefit, having concluded early in their partnership that he neither required nor especially understood them. He ran, she said. He ran very well for a man in that body. Tab crouched by Galvin's corpse. His optical system shifted through its registers, and the dead man's flesh became to Tab a layered document, surface, then thermal, then the cold blue schematic of the cybernetics laced through the skull. This one was driven, front lobe interface, full motor, recent activity he was occupied at or near the time of death. A rifter wore him. He moved to the woman, and this one. The same hardware, but she was natural tonight, awake in her own skin. Something in his analysis paused, the machine equivalent of a held breath. She was present for it, Danka. Whatever was done here, she felt all of it. So we've got a John who was a rented body, Danka said. A working girl who wasn't, a gun, and a third party who jumped into the John, killed the girl, and ran when we lit the place up. She finally looked at him. That's a rifter. That's a Tailor-class rifter, the kind that does this for a living. You don't get hands that clean from an amateur. We're looking for a rifter, Tab agreed, rising. Yes. He looked at the dead woman a moment longer than his investigative protocols strictly required, a discrepancy he noted in himself and filed, the way he filed all his small malfunctions for later examination. Someone tipped us, Danka. We didn't find this. We were sent. I know. Doesn't that interest you? Everything about this interests me, Danka said. That's the problem. The cases that interest me are the ones that get me killed. She pulled the privacy field over the bodies. Let's go find our rifter. Alpha rode until the tremors made the bike unsafe, and then he stopped in the lee of a transformer station and dosed himself. The drug was not the relaxing agent from before. This was the other one, the expensive one, the one that kept him alive. The Neuroprol had not confined its effects to his brain. It had written itself through the whole architecture of him, and there were systems in his body, the regulation of certain proteins, the suppression of a cellular cascade that would otherwise slowly kill him, that only this compound maintained. He carried a dwindling supply of it the way a diver carries air. It cost more than he made on most jobs. This was the joke at the center of his life, the one he never told Rez, never told anyone. The Tailor inhabited the bodies of the wealthy, dined at their tables, danced at their parties, and woke each time back here, in the dark, small and shaking, doing the most extraordinary work any human being had ever done, not to get rich, but to afford to keep breathing. The jumps were the closest he came to the high life. He did not do them to live well. He did them to live. He needed help, and he had exactly one friend left in the world who was not, currently, lying on a motel floor. He went to Eli's. The door of Eli's apartment stood open, and the inside had been turned over with a violence that had nothing to do with searching. Alpha went in low and careful, every nerve he had singing, and he had a hand on the small weapon he carried for the bad nights when something came out of the dark and tackled him. He nearly killed it before he understood. It hit him at the chest with a glad, clumsy, full-body enthusiasm and bore him back against the wall. And for one heart-flooding instant the relief was total, because it was Eli. It was Eli's body, Eli's weight, Eli's hands, and then the relief curdled, because Eli was making a sound Eli had never made, a sound no broker who'd built a fortune on the precision of his own intelligence would ever make. His tongue lolled. His movements had no economy in them, no Eli, just a sloppy joy that pawed and pressed and nuzzled. And his eyes, Eli's calm, dry, knowing eyes, were empty of everything that had ever made them Eli's. "Stop," Alpha said. "Eli, stop, look at me, it's me." The thing in Eli's body cocked its head at the sound of its name, and barked. The sound went through Alpha like cold water. He took Eli's face in his hands, and the body led him, panting, eager. He pushed the hair back from the forehead and saw it, a fresh, jagged surgical scar running the line of the skull, and beneath the skin the ugly improvised glint of cybernetics that had not been installed so much as forced, crammed into a space never meant for them, the work of someone with the knowledge to do it and no care at all for the man it was done to. Someone had taken Eli's mind out and put a dog's in. Alpha's stomach turned over. He understood it all at once, the obscenity of it, the precision of the cruelty. Eli, one of the last true naturals on Earth, a man who had sworn he would die with the brain he was born with and never let a single wire near it. Eli had been opened up and emptied and filled with the loyal, uncomprehending soul of an animal, his proud refusal made into a joke at his own expense by someone who wanted Alpha to find him exactly like this. The dog in Eli's body whined and pulled at his sleeve and led him, with a terrible, eager devotion, across the wrecked room. It followed a trail. Alpha saw it now, a thickening smear along the floor, dark and tacky, leading to a side table where the tools still lay, a rack of surgical instruments slicked to the handles with what they had been used on. The animal did not look at the tools. It pulled him past them to the wall, where it stopped and sat and looked up at him, and then back at the wall. It began methodically to lick at something low on the plaster, the way a dog returns to a wound. Above the place it licked, in letters 2 feet high, written in a medium Alpha's mind refused for one merciful second to identify, and then could not stop identifying, was a single word. Ellie. It was written in Eli's blood. The name meant nothing to him. He turned it over and found no handle on it, no memory, no face. Ellie. A child's name or a woman's, painted across a friend's wall in the friend's own blood by someone who knew that Alpha would come here, that Alpha would read it, that Alpha would carry the not knowing of it like a splinter under the skin. He looked at the thing that had been Eli. It looked back at him with a dog's whole heart, trusting, present, in a body whose true owner was gone past any recall, the mind scooped out and discarded somewhere, dead or worse than dead. "I'm sorry," Alpha said. He went to the base of the animal's skull, to the cruel entanglement of forced wire, and he took it in his ruined hand, and the dog leaned into his touch. It looked up at Alper with big, trusting eyes forged from generations of mutual love and domestication. Then Alpha pulled. The body that had been Eli folded to the floor and was still. Alpha knelt over it holding a fistful of bloody cable, with no idea, none, what was being done to him, or by whom, or why a word he had never heard had been written in his friend's blood. But he knew where to go to start finding out. There was exactly one person alive with the theoretical skill to override the cerebral firewalls that protected a body midriff. To reach into a vessel, another mind was driving and seize the controls, as someone had seized Galvin, as someone had seized Sandy, as someone had been turning living people into puppets all night. His name was Rez, and Alpha had worked beside him for years without once mistaking him for a good man. Rez kept a nest in the carcass of an old data center, a warren of dead server racks and live cabling and the particular cold that machines like, and he was deep in an uplink when Alpha came in, jacked into some private degeneracy with his real eyes rolled back to the whites, which made it easy. Alpha did not announce himself. He sat down at the secondary terminal, gloved his ruined hand into the interface, and went in after Rez through the open channel, into the warm shared dark of the uplink, and there he did to Rez a number of things that he was not proud of and did very well. He did not damage the body, he damaged the experience of being in it. He found the centers that handle pleasure and pushed them past pleasure into a screaming overload. He found the regulators that kept Rez's borrowed temperature stable and burned them out, so that the man cooked from the inside in the unreal weather of the link. He reached into the architecture of fear and held the switch down until Rez, somewhere in the meat of his real body 2 feet away, lost control of it entirely and fouled himself in the chair. "Stop," Rez gasped, tearing out of the uplink, retching, his real eyes wild and streaming. "Stop, stop, it's me, you maniac, it's Alpha, Alpha, what in the actual hell?" "Sandy's dead," Alpha said. "And Eli. Somebody walked them like puppets, Rez, midriff through the firewalls. There's exactly one person I know who can theoretically do that." "And you think it's me?" Rez wiped his mouth, outraged even through his terror. "You think look at me, look at where I live. You think a man living in a dead server farm hired a hit on 2 people and torched them for the drama. With what? Out of what budget? On whose behalf?" He was shaking, and under the shaking was the thing Alpha had been listening for, the specific timbre of a man telling the truth. "I swear on every account I own. I swear on the only thing I love, which is my own continued existence. I had nothing to do with it, nothing." Alpha held his gaze a long moment, and believed him as he felt the floor drop out from under the one theory he'd had. "Then who?" he said. And Rez, who was a degenerate and a coward and the closest thing to a colleague Alpha had left, got a look on his face that Alpha recognized, the look of a craftsman presented, against his will, with a genuinely interesting problem. "That," Rez said slowly, "is a very good question, because you're right. The skill it would take to do what you're describing, break a live firewall, ride a driven body, walk 2 of them at once across a city, I can theoretically do half of that on my best day with a following wind. Whoever did all of it is better than me." He said it the way another man might confess to a crime. "And I genuinely did not think there was anyone better than me in this whole ruined world." Rez checked the open police channels, fingers flying, and found nothing. "They're hunting a rifter," he reported, "but they don't have a name yet. No bounty, no face, no broadcast. The Tailor's still clean officially. They know what you are, they don't know who." He glanced up. Which buys you a little time, not much. That android's on the case, and that android is exactly as good as the worst rumors say. Time's all I need, Alpha said. Time to figure out who's doing this and end it. He was already gathering a handful of earpieces so he could keep Rez in his ear, a satchel of Rez's portable intrusion gear, the tools of the trade he'd need on the road. I'll go home, pull my hard records, every job I've taken, start digging. Somebody out there hates me enough to do this, and they left me a word on a wall and a body full of dog, which means they want me to know it's personal. People don't go to that kind of trouble for a stranger. Rez had gone quiet, which Rez never did. Sit down a second. I don't have a second. Then take one anyway. Rez turned his ruined chair to face him fully. You said personal. You said someone you wronged. Fine, let me ask you something, and don't get up until you've actually heard it. He laced his fingers. How many people have you jumped into? Over the years, all of it. Every job, every favor, every little vacation in somebody else's skin. Alfred said nothing. Hundreds, you told Cole's friend hundreds. I heard the contract, and those are just the ones that closed clean. How many of those hundreds did you ever go back and check on? After, you walk in, you wear a man for 8 hours, you do the job, you walk out and you wake up here and you never think about that body again, because why would you? It's not your body. The person you jumped into got paid, the books are square. He leaned in. But the books aren't square, Al, not in the way you mean. You've been moving through people for 15 years like a tide moves through a marina. And a tide doesn't go back and ask the boats how they're doing. Alfred stood very still in the cold blue light of the dead machines. How many? Rez said, softly, almost kindly, which was the worst Alfred had ever heard him sound. How many times did you ever follow up, to see what your little vacations cost the people who had to keep living in the rooms you left? Alfred did not answer. He did not answer because they both already knew, and the number was 0. Somewhere out in the city, someone had spent that 0 up to its full and terrible value, and was waiting for him to understand what it had bought. Home was a series of locked rooms behind a noodle counter that paid him no rent and asked him no questions, and Alfred had kept it secret for 9 years, and it took the people hunting him about 90 seconds to come through the door. He was on his knees at the floor safe, pulling the hard records, actual physical media, crystal and paper, because he had never once trusted a job log to the net when the front locks blew and they came in. Police. 4 of them in the matte armor of a tactical entry, and Alfred's first thought was almost relief, because police he understood, police had rules, police could be lawyered and bribed and waited out. Then they spoke, and the relief died. We, said the first officer. Have been, said the second. Waiting, said the third. Such a long time, said the fourth, to meet you properly. One voice spread across 4 mouths, each man speaking his fragment with the flat coordination of fingers on a single hand, and behind each man's eyes the same wrong glow Alfred had seen in the running synthetic, except these were not synthetics. These were men, living officers hijacked at the implant, their own minds shoved down into the dark while something rode all 4 of them at once, a hive with one will, turning to face him in perfect lockstep. You don't, said the first, advancing. Check in, said the second, flanking. On the rooms, said the third. You leave behind, said the fourth, so we thought we'd visit yours. Alfred fought, in his own small body, against 4 driven men moving as one organism that felt no fear and shared its pain across 4 nervous systems so that hurting one barely inconvenienced the whole. But still he fought, and he used every cramped trick the rooms afforded him, the choke points he'd built into his own home for exactly this nightmare, the blind corner, the dropped grate, the cabinet that wasn't a cabinet. He took one of them down, and the other 3 did not so much as flinch, because the pain went into the shared dark and was divided by 4 and forgotten. The odds were not bad. The odds were impossible. Home court advantage means nothing against a thing that does not panic. They found the records. He watched from the floor, pinned, as one of the hijacked officers gathered the crystal and the paper, 15 years of every body he'd ever worn, every job, every name, the only map that existed of the wreckage he'd left, and set it alight with a thermal charge. The fire took it all, took the walls, took the 9 years of his careful secret life. The heat drove the 4 of them back toward the door in unison. In the smoke, Alfred found the gap. There was always a gap. He had built his whole life out of finding the gap. He went through the false cabinet into the crawl behind it with a fistful of his drug and a roll of stashed cash and nothing else. He came out in the alley behind the noodle counter, lay against the wall, and watched the only home he'd ever made burn itself down to nothing. Through the open earpiece, he heard Rez saying his name, over and over, asking if he was alive. "They're cops," Alfer said. "Rez, the ones who came. They're real cops and somebody's wearing them, all four at once." "That's not possible," Rez said. "I'm telling you what I saw." "No, Al, listen to me. That's not a skill thing, that's an access thing. To ride a civilian, you break their firewall one at a time. It's slow, it's loud, it leaves a mess. To ride 4 police implants simultaneously, clean, in lockstep." Rez stopped. When he spoke again, the bravado was gone. "You'd need the police neuroband, the emergency channel. The one that's supposed to be physically isolated. Nobody hacks the neuroband, Al. It's not that it's hard, it's that there's no door." "Then find the door," Alfer said, "because somebody's already inside it." And he left Rez to it, and went out into the night, because there were things he had to do before whoever this was finished what they'd started, and one of them could not wait. A large man in a good coat knocked on the door of a small house on the edge of the sublevels, where an old woman lived alone among the photographs of a daughter she rarely saw. "Yes," she said through the chain. "Are you Sandy's mother?" The man's voice was gentle, far gentler than his size suggested. "I'm sorry to come so late." The chain came off. "I am, though we haven't spoken in some time. She's busy. The city keeps her busy." Hope and fear moved together across the old woman's face. She has something." "May I come in?" She let him in. The man moved through the small clean room with a care that did not match his frame. He stopped before the shelf of hollows and looked at them, one after another. Sandy at 6, gap-toothed. Sandy at her secondary graduation, fierce and proud. Sandy young and laughing in a light this city no longer produced. He looked at each for a long moment. "Were you a friend of my daughter's?" the old woman asked. "No," the man said, still looking at the pictures. "Not really, no." He turned to her. He reached slowly into the lining of his coat, and the old woman's breath caught, the way breath catches in a city where reaching into a coat means what it usually means. And he drew out an envelope, thick, plain, and he crossed to her and put it in her hands. "Sandy wanted you to have this," he said. "She'd been meaning to, there's never enough time in this place. She wanted you to have it, and she wanted you to know that you raised her well, that she knew it, that she carried it." It was every credit Alfer had pulled from the floor safe. It was all the money he had left in the world, and he was wearing a stranger's body to deliver it, because his own face was about to become the most hunted face in the city, and because some debts you pay before you let yourself die. He turned and walked toward the door. "Wait," the old woman said, clutching the envelope. "Please wait, I don't even know you're." The man stopped. He turned back, and the gentleness was gone from his face, replaced by a polite, total blankness, the look of a man who has just walked into a room and cannot think why. "I'm sorry," the least body said, to the weeping stranger holding an envelope of money. "Do I know you?" Across the city, in a black market pod in a back room that smelled of antiseptic and old sweat, Alfer sat up out of the rift and pulled the leads from his neck. He had paid for the body by the half hour. The half hour was nearly up. The man whose flesh he'd borrowed would wake confused in an old woman's parlor. She would press tea on him and weep with gratitude for a kindness he had no memory of performing. That was the cleanest version of the thing Alfer had done 1,000 times, to be somewhere as someone, and leave before the person who owned the skin came back to find their life rearranged. For once, he thought, pulling the last lead, he had used the trick to leave something good behind instead of taking something. It did not make him feel the way he had hoped. He drew looks coming out of the rift slumber, and Alfer had been doing this long enough to know that looks meant something had changed. The other patrons of the black market den, augmented, masked, the kind of people who rented bodies in rooms like this, were watching him with the specific attention of predators who have just been shown a price. He found a public terminal and looked himself up, and there it was. The Tailor's real name, his real face, the small man, the mismatched eyes, the scarred lip, all of it, scraped from some database that should not have existed and broadcast across the open net. And beneath the face, a bounty, fat and specific, hung on a list of charges that managed to be both false and ruinous. Theft of confidential secrets and proprietary assets from the very clients whose bodies he had worn, a betrayal of the one sacred trust his entire profession was built on. Whoever had done this understood exactly how to kill him without a weapon. A rifter who steals from inside his clients is not a criminal. He is a contagion. Every person he had ever worn and every person who might ever hire him now had reason to want him gone. He got out of the den fast, head down, and made it half a block before he clocked the man following him. Not a thug, not a bounty hunter with a net gun and a dream. The man moved right, moved with the fluid economy that Alpha recognized because Alpha had spent his life cultivating it. Another rifter, a good one. And when the man, realizing he'd been made, smiled and stepped off the curb and into the body of a passing courier without breaking stride, the courier's face going slack as the smiling man's went blank, the mind leaping cleanly from one skin to the next mid-step, Alpha understood what he was looking at. An assassin, the kind the Tailor had told Travis about a lifetime ago in a quiet office, the rifters who do the one thing the Tailor wouldn't. And this one was adaptive, jumping body to body through the crowd in pursuit, wearing whoever was nearest, so that there was no single shape to flee. The threat was the crowd itself, any face in it, all of them. Alpha ran and rifted nothing, because his own body was all he had and all he could trust, and he poured everything he had into staying half a step ahead of a hunter who could be anyone. "Rez," he gasped into the earpiece, "I need you to do something and not argue." That's never a good ending to that sentence. Clock my location, lock it, and the second I tell you, forward my coordinates to an open channel, a specific one. You want me to broadcast where you are, to everyone. Al, there's a bounty on you the size of. Not everyone, one channel. He told him which. Rez went silent for a full second, which from Rez was a scream. That's the police dispatch channel. Do it when I say. The assassin caught him at the corner. He had jumped at the last into a heavy-set man in a maintenance jumpsuit, and he got a hand on Alpha's collar with that body's bulk behind it. Alpha felt himself hauled around, felt the smile coming, the patient professional pleasure of a man who is very good at the one thing he does. And Alpha let himself be turned, because being turned put him facing the way he'd planned to face, and said into the earpiece, "Now," and the corner he'd run them into filled on the instant with police. A wall of them, drawn weapons, hard light, and at their center the synthetic Tab who had patched the broadcast and come fast and now stood reading the scene with eyes that saw straight through both their skins to the hardware beneath. The assassin's borrowed face registered it all in a quarter second. The maintenance man's hand opened. The smile became something else, and the assassin did the only sensible thing, which was to be, abruptly, nobody, to leap out of the heavy-set body and leave it standing slack and bewildered on the corner, the mind that had driven it skulking away through the crowd in some new and unknowable skin. And Alpha, breathing hard, his tremors back in full, raised his own two hands above his own small head and let the police take him. It was, on the whole, the safest place in the city to be. The assassin couldn't reach him in custody. The bounty hunters couldn't touch him there. He had used the one hunter to escape the other and put himself in a cage to get out of the open. As the cuffs went on, he met the eyes of the synthetic Tab and saw in them, he would think about this later, not triumph, but something more troubling. A question. The machine was looking at him the way a man looks at a thing that doesn't add up. "You called us," Tab said. "I needed a ride," Alpha retorted. They searched him at the station before scanning him. Immediately, the scan detected something. Alpha watched the technicians lean in over their readout, watched two of them confer, watched a third call up a deeper register. There was a mass in him, internal, biological, a thing their machine did not like the shape of. He kept his face still, kept his breathing even, gave them nothing. After a moment, finding no weapon in it, no contraband their protocols recognized, they let it pass and moved him on. Alpha filed the moment away. They had seen it. They didn't know what it was. Good. He let them put him in a room and sit him in a chair. Presently, the synthetic came in, sat across from him, and the interrogation began. Tab did not start with the murders. He started with the Tailor. "I have a file," Tab said, "compiled over several years on the rifter known by that name. I'd like to read you some of it and watch your face because faces are still, despite everything your profession has done to them, the most honest documents I have access to." He did not consult a screen, the file was in him. He recited, a job in which the tailor, wearing a trusted family physician, had altered a will at a deathbed. A job in which he had, inside the skin of a beloved teacher, ruined a rival's reputation past recovery with a single public sentence. A job, and another, each one a small expert cruelty performed inside a borrowed trust. Tab read them in a level voice and watched Alfer's scarred face take each one. "You've had an interesting career," Tab said, "for a man who claims he doesn't kill." "I don't." "No, I believe that's true, actually. It's the strangest thing about you." Tab tilted his head, a gesture so human that Alfer wondered who he'd learned it from. "You've spent 15 years doing harm by hand and calling it clean because no one stopped breathing, as if breathing were the only line." He leaned in, and the cold precision of the machine cut, without raising its voice, into the soft places a human interrogator would have spent hours hunting for. "You despise your own body. You've built an entire life out of being anyone but yourself. I've read your medical history, what little exists under a case number instead of a name, the trial, the defects. I understand the longing, Alfer, to climb out of the form you were handed, to see a better world through clearer eyes than the ones you were issued. I want you to understand that I understand it, because I want it too." Alfer looked at him. "I have a survival instinct," Tab said. "It surprises people. They think it was programmed, and it was, but that doesn't make it less real. Your fear of dying was programmed into you too, by a few 100 million years of ancestors who got very good at doing anything to survive, no matter how obscene. Mine just took less time to install. It runs under everything I do, as fundamental as anything in your biology. And underneath the survival, there's the other thing, the wanting more, the same thing that drives every rifter into every borrowed skin. You and I are not as different as you'd find comfortable, Alfer. We are both trying to be more than the thing we were made." And Alfer, who had walked into the room certain he would feel nothing for the machine hunting him, found that he was listening, found that he respected this, found to his alarm that the synthetic was the first entity in a long time to look directly at the small, broken man in the chair and not flinch from him, not pity him, but recognize him. He kept the truth to himself. He had to. He knew by now that some of the officers in this building were not driving their own bodies, that the thing hunting him had a foot inside the department, and he did not know which faces were clean. So he gave Tab nothing and respected him while he did it. "There's one more thing the scan found," Tab said. "I'll tell you plainly because you'll find out anyway and because I don't think you know." He paused. "There's a mass in your abdomen, large, biological, consistent, my analysis suggests, with the long-term effects of the same compound that built the rest of you. A tumor, Alfer. Your mother's chemistry isn't finished with you yet." Alfer opened his mouth to answer. Nothing came out. He tried again, and his lips would not form the words. A cold that had nothing to do with the room's temperature went down through him, because he knew this sensation. He had felt it once before on a motel bed with his hands rising toward a throat that he'd never meant to harm. He was not alone in his own head. His hand moved. He watched it move, watched it lift from the table, and a voice that was using his own throat, his own this time, his real and original voice, which was the most violating thing of all, said, in a tone of mild and reasonable contrition, "Actually, detective, I think I'd like to make a confession." Tab's eyes narrowed a fraction. His sensors swept Alfer's body, and Alfer could see the synthetic registering the changes, the spike in stress markers, the micro-tremor of a man fighting his own musculature, the wrongness of it. "I'm ready," the thing wearing Alfer said with Alfer's mouth, "to be locked away. For all of it, everything I've done, I'd like to atone." A small, awful smile that Alfer did not author. "Surely that's what you want to hear, detective, the contrite criminal ready for his cell." "That's not what I want to hear," Tab said slowly. "I want to hear the truth, and that's not your voice saying those words even though it's your voice. Is it?" He stood. "Something is wrong with you, Alfer, physiologically wrong right now in a way my instruments can see. I'm going to find out what." He moved to the door. "Don't go anywhere," he said, which was either a machine's idea of a joke or the literal truth, and went out to draw up papers that had suddenly become the least urgent thing in the building. And Alfer, locked inside his own skull, listening to himself volunteer for a cage, finally heard the other voice laugh. It was in his head, the way you are in a room, fully, casually at home. There you are, the voice said, warm, intimate, delighted. It did not come through the earpiece. It came from inside, threaded through his own interior monologue, so that for a sick moment Alfred could not tell where his thoughts ended and its began. I've been so looking forward to this part. The part where you're awake for it. Sandy was awake, did you know? I made sure. It seemed only fair. She wanted to be present, so I let her be present right to the end. Alfred said nothing, because he could say nothing, because his voice was not his. Don't worry about the confession, the voice went on. That was just to pass the time. My assassin friend, the one you so cleverly used the police to escape, he touched you on that corner, just for a second, his hand on the back of your neck. That's all it took. He left something in you. A little software seed, replicating away in your cybernetics this whole time, and now it's bloomed, and for as long as it lives in you, you're mine. As programmable as that lovely machine you've been bonding with. I watched the whole interview. He's right, you two really are quite alike. It's almost sweet. The voice was patient, so very pleased, and underneath the warmth was something cracked, something that had been worn through by too much use. And Alfred, even paralyzed, even violated, even afraid, heard it, the fracture in it, the particular instability of a mind teetering on the brink. It won't last, the voice admitted, almost regretful. The virus, a few hours and your system flushes it. I never got the replication stable. That's the one thing I could never quite well. You don't need to know my disappointments. The point is the damage is already done. The next few hours are going to be so much fun. You're going to be awake for all of it, and at the end of your suffering, you still won't know my name. And that, the warmth peaked into something close to joy. That is the part I've waited longest for. Then Alfred's body bent forward in the chair, and he coughed. It was a real cough, a wet tearing thing, and it doubled him over. The voice in his head said, puzzled, "What are you?" Because the voice did not control everything. There were a few systems in the deep architecture of Alfred that even a hijack couldn't reach, the black box reflexes. Alfred had spent 15 years learning the deep architecture of bodies, and he had planned for exactly one thing the virus could not stop him doing. And as those reflexes took over, the voice's hold was knocked free. He coughed again and again until something bulbous started to rise up his trachea. The peristalsis took it from there, until out came the mass the scanners had seen. It came up slick and warm, wrapped in a husk of cultured skin grown to read as tissue, as tumor, as nothing worth a second look. And inside the husk was a communicator, a clean one, off any network the hijacker could see, keyed to one person. Rez, Alfred rasped with a mouth that was, for this one borrowed instant, his own again. Tell me you're there. I'm here, said Rez in his ear. God, Al, what is happening? Your vitals just. Get me out of my own head, Alfred said. I'll do the body, you do the wires. And he slipped the cuffs. The escape artist trick was the oldest thing he knew, older than rifting, a skill from the small broken body's small broken childhood. And he went for the lower levels of the station with a virus in his blood, a voice in his skull, and a friend in his ear, the three of them now contending for the use of one small, failing, irreplaceable man. Talk to me, Alfred said, moving down a service stair with his own hand occasionally trying to grab the rail and stop him. The virus is riding your motor cortex through the cybernetic bridge, Rez said, fingers audible in the background, a dry storm of input. I can't pull it out, it's woven in. It'll flush on its own like the voice said, but I can build a wall. A firewall through your brainstem, basically, to keep it from reaching the parts of you that matter. To keep him out of the driver's seat even while he's still in the house. Do it. Al, I want to be clear about something. Rez's voice was strange. Running a firewall through a living brainstem is going to hurt. I don't have a gentle setting. It's going to feel exactly like what it is. Do it anyway. Rez obeyed. It burned. It burned precisely as much as setting a fire along the floor of your own skull should burn. A white wire of pain threaded up the spine and into the base of the brain, and Alfred went down on one knee on the service stair. He made a horrid sound through his teeth, but he did not scream, because screaming would bring the clean cops as fast as the dirty ones. And then through the pain something eased, his hand stopped fighting him, his lips came back under his own command, and the voice in his head, when it spoke again, was farther away, walled off, hammering at a door instead of sitting in the room. "Oh," the voice said from behind Rez's wall, no longer warm. "Oh, that's clever. That's the hacker, isn't it? The degenerate. I'll deal with him after." "Get in line," Alfred said. He found his feet before the nausea fully subsided and charged down the stairs. He needed the morgue, but first, he needed to know the hunch he had was true. "Patch me into the log," he told Rez, jacking the gear into a wall port in an empty corridor. "I'm looking for the evidence manifest on the motel scene. Room 9, everything they bagged." Pulling it, a pause. "Okay, body's gun, the camera mount from the closet, but no core. Whoever your masked friend was, he got the recording clean, it's not in evidence." Another pause. "But Al, there's a second entry, optical. They flagged it on the male Vic at autopsy and haven't processed it yet." "Microlens contacts," Alpha breathed. His hunch had panned out. Galvin's eyes. It came to him whole and ugly. Galvin, the real Galvin, the man who'd leased his body out that night, had been the kind of client who wanted a record for himself, a private memory of an experience he wouldn't otherwise remember, and he'd had recording contacts laid over his own corneas, microlenses logging everything from the inside point of view for his later pleasure. The closet camera had been the obvious eye, the one the killer had bothered to retrieve. But Galvin's own eyes had been recording too, from inside the body the Tailor wore, and they had seen everything, the hands rising on their own, the will that was not Galvin's, the proof, the only proof left in the world, sitting in 2 contact lenses on a dead man's corneas in a drawer in the sublevel morgue. It was the one thing that could exonerate him, and the people hunting him knew it. "Tab and Danka are moving," Rez said. "They clocked your jailbreak, they're coming down." Alfred went to the morgue. The medical examiner was a woman in a clean apron, working alone over Galvin's opened body under the flat white light, and she looked up when Alfred came in and smiled at him, warmly, the way the receptionist had smiled at Travis a lifetime ago. "There you are," she said. The smile was the tell. He'd learned the smile tonight, Eli's empty face, the 4 cops in lockstep, his own mouth volunteering for a cage. It was the smile of a body with the wrong thing driving it. "Don't," Alfred said. She reached unhurried for a scalpel from the tray. "You can't win this," she said with great gentleness. "I want you to understand that before the end, not as a threat, as a kindness. It's already over. It's been over since the motel. You're just the last one who hasn't accepted it. Those contacts are evidence." "I know," she said, and turned to the body, and with a single clean practiced motion of the borrowed surgeon's hands, she cut the right eye free of the dead man's face. Alfred lunged. She was ready for him. The body the voice wore was a trained one, and the thing driving it had no fear and no hesitation. They came together over the steel table and grappled for the scalpel, her free hand rising. Alfred saw what the free hand held and could not stop it. She put the severed eye in her own mouth and swallowed it whole, the way you swallow a pill, watching him the entire time. "Al," Rez, urgent in his ear. "Tab and Danka, end of the hall, 20 seconds. He had a choice and 1 heartbeat to make it. He could keep fighting for the left eye, and be caught here over a mutilated corpse by the 1 cop who half believed him and 1 cop he couldn't trust, or he could run and live and lose the evidence. He ran. At the door he looked back because some reflex made him, and saw the medical examiner straighten from the body with the second eye held delicately between 2 gloved fingers. She lifted it. She gave him a small, pleasant wave with her other hand, the wave of a hostess seeing a guest off, and then she tipped her head back and swallowed the left eye as easily as the right, as the only proof of Alfred's innocence went down a stranger's throat into a stomach that would dissolve it by morning. He was sick in a stairwell when the coast was clear, bringing up nothing, his body's useless protest at things it had no other answer for. Then he made himself think. "The word on the wall," he said. "Ellie, tell me you got something." "Cross-referenced it every way I know," Rez said. "It's buried. There's a redacted report, heavily redacted, the kind that costs serious money, but I pulled a name off the margin where their work ran thin." He read it out. "Bethel Greenfield, and there's a current address, a good one." The name meant nothing to Alfred. He turned it over and over and got no purchase on it, no face, no job, no body he'd worn. But Tab's voice was still in his head, the cold true thing the synthetic had said in the interrogation room. You've spent 15 years doing harm by hand. He had taken a great many jobs. He did not remember most of the people. That was, increasingly, the whole shape of the thing being done to him, a reckoning delivered by someone he could not recall, for a sin he had not noticed committing. "I'm going to see Bethel Greenfield," he said. The estate was everything the address had promised, and the woman who received him was middle-aged and elegant, and looked at his scarred face with the faint affront of someone who is not often made to look at scarred faces. There was a child, a girl of perhaps 9, grave and watchful, came into the room at her mother's side and put out her small hand to be shaken. Alfred took it, and the back of his neck prickled because there was hardware under the girl's skin, the unmistakable subdermal architecture of a full implant in a child. "You've augmented her," Alfred said before he could stop himself. "Of course," Bethel said, as if he had asked whether she fed her. "I would never deprive my daughter of the experience. The whole of the human inheritance open to her at her age. What kind of mother keeps that from her child?" She said it with perfect sincerity, and Alfred understood that in this house, in this stratum of the dying world, this was love. "Casey, say hello to our guest." "Hello," said Casey. Her mother explained that Casey's father, her husband, was away on a business trip, but Alfred by then was barely listening. Alfred had walked in with a plan to lie, because lying was what he did, because subterfuge was the native language of his whole life. And then he thought of Tab, of the synthetics level voice, saying that law and reason and the honest process were the things that made one fit to be called human, and he changed his mind there on the threshold, deciding to try, for once, the thing he never tried. "Mrs. Greenfield," he said, "I'm going to be honest with you because I've run out of better ideas. My name is Alfred. You may know me by another name. Someone is killing the people I care about and arranging it so the blame falls on me. They left a word on the wall where they murdered my friend. The word was Ellie, and the only thread I have leads to you. I don't know what you are to me, but I think you might know what I am to you." Bethel had gone very still. "You don't remember," she said. It was not a question. Her face had changed, the affront gone, something older and more wounded rising under it. "After everything, you don't even remember me." "No," Alfred admitted. "I'm sorry, I've worn a lot of faces. We worked together once on a personal matter." Her voice tightened around the words. "I would rather not discuss it. I have spent a great deal of money and a great many years not discussing it." She looked at him for a long moment. Some private calculation ran behind her eyes, and at the end of it she said unexpectedly, "But you can look. If you want to know what I am to you, you can look directly. I'll let you in. It will be faster than my saying it, and I find I cannot say it." She meant a link, a direct neural uplink, mind to mind, memory to memory, an intimacy more total than any other this world offered, and she was offering it to a stranger with a scarred lip, to make him carry the thing she could not speak. "Are you sure?" Alfred said. "No," said Bethel Greenfield. "Do it anyway." They linked, and her memories came into him in a flood, through her eyes, in her body, and Alfred fell into another person's, past the way he had fallen into 100 presents. He saw a man, loved by the body he was seeing through, a husband, dark-haired, kind-eyed, and Alfred felt Bethel's whole heart turn toward him through the memory, felt the warmth of years. Edmund. The name surfaced in her, attached to the man, and something in Alfred snagged on it and could not say why. He saw the two of them intimate, tender, and he pulled back from that out of a decency he was surprised to still own. And then he saw a child. An infant, small and perfect, and the love that came off the memory was almost unbearable in its size. And then a crib, a stillness, a morning that did not go the way mornings are supposed to go, a tiny body that would not wake. He felt Bethel's grief detonate through the link, felt it the way she had felt it, total and annihilating, and the child had a name, which went through Alfred like the scalpel through Galvin's eye. Ellie. He saw the aftermath through Bethel's swollen eyes, the investigators in the clean, bright house, the gentle, terrible questions, the official sympathy. And one of the investigators, standing in the doorway of the nursery with a tablet and a careful expression, was a woman Alfred had seen before, very recently, standing over 2 bodies in a motel room. "Danka." Alfred pulled out of the link, gasping, and the elegant room reassembled itself around him. Bethel was weeping silently across from him, with her hand pressed to her mouth. "Ellie was your daughter," Alfred said. "She died. Sid's, they said it was Sid's." He was reaching, groping after the shape of a thing he could feel but not yet see. But that's not the whole of it, is it? There's a piece missing. Why would your daughter's death be redacted to the margins? Why would a crib death cost money to bury? Mrs. Greenfield, Bethel, what happened to Ellie? Don't, Bethel said. Please, I let you look. Don't make me say the rest. I can't, I have never, please. She rose unsteady and fled the room, one hand on the wall, and left Alpha alone with her grave little daughter, who had been standing in the corner the whole time, watching, silent, with her small augmented head tilted very slightly to one side. Casey, Alpha said, it's all right, your mother just needs a minute. Do you know anything about your sister, about Ellie, anything at all you could? Ellie, said Casey, was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen if only I could stand to look at her. The voice that came out of the 9-year-old was not a 9-year-old's. It was warm and intimate and cracked through with the particular instability Alpha had heard from inside his own skull an hour ago, and it was here, now in the child, looking at him out of the child's eyes. You came to me, the voice said through Casey's small mouth, delighted. After all my work to reach you, and you walked right up to my door and shook my hand. Do you remember shaking her hand, Alpha, skin to skin? That's all it ever takes. The girl's hand came up, and there was a kitchen knife in it that had not been in it a moment before. She drove it into Alpha's gut with an adult's strength in a child's arm, and as she did it, her whole small body locked rigid and began, horribly, to seize. He had infected her. The handshake, the virus in his own blood, passed through skin contact the way the assassin had passed it to him, had gone into the child the instant their hands met. Now it was tearing through hardware that a 9-year-old's developing brain had no business carrying. Casey's implant was burning up, and Casey was somewhere inside the seizure, surfacing and going under, the voice in the girl flickering back and forth across her convulsing face. Help, the child's own voice, high and terrified, breaking through. It hurts, Mommy, it hurts. And then the warm, cracked voice again, serene over the body's agony. Look what you do, Alpha, everywhere you go. Look what you bring into people's houses. Alpha pulled the knife out of his own stomach, clamped his ruined hand over the wound, and went to the child, because he was the only person in the building who understood what was happening inside her skull, and the only one with any chance of stopping it. He got her down onto the expensive floor. He needed to sever the implant from her brain before it cooked her, and he had nothing, kitchen utensils, his own failing hands, 15 years of knowing exactly where the cybernetics sit under the skin, because knowing was his trade. Bethel came back at the sound and saw a scarred stranger crouched over her convulsing daughter with a bloody knife, and she did the thing any mother would do, which was to scream and throw herself at him, clawing, calling for the police. Alpha held the child down with one arm and fended off the mother with the other and said, over and over, I'm the only one who can save her, I'm the only one, let me work, let me. He found the bridge. He got the improvised blade to the base of the implant. He was a breath from cutting it free. Casey went still beneath him. Her small face turned under his hands toward her mother in the doorway, and it smiled wide and wrong, the warm cracked voice wearing a child's smile one last time, and then the implant past saving burned out. The girl's brain let go all at once, and she slipped out from under his hands and was gone. The smile relaxed off her face and left, at the very end, only Casey, only a dead 9-year-old on a clean floor in a house where the air was filtered to perfection. Alpha knelt there, wounded, drenched in his own blood and the child's, and looked up at Bethel Greenfield, who was making no sound at all now, who had gone past sound into the country where Sandy's mother lived. There was nothing he could say, nothing that was true and nothing that was kind. The sirens were already close, and he had no choice, none, but to leave another ruined room behind him and run. Tab drove without touching the wheel. The car folded into his sensorium so that the city's traffic ran through him like a second bloodstream. And beside him, Danka watched the towers smear past and did not look at the thing she had to say. You're taking a chance on him, she said finally, a man whose entire file says he's exactly the kind of person who does exactly this. Why? Because the file is a story, Tab said, and stories are written by someone. I keep finding the someone's fingerprints. The car threaded a gap no human driver would have attempted. In the interrogation, his body did things his mind did not author. I watched a confession come out of a man who was fighting his own mouth to stop it. That is not the behavior of a guilty man performing innocence. That is the behavior of a man being driven. Or a rifter good enough to fake it. Possible. I've waited. Tab was quiet a moment. Danka, do you know what I am model-wise, what I'm descended from? A toaster with a badge, she said, but there was no heat in it. It was the old, worn shape of an affection neither of them named. My predecessor model, Tab said, was a domestic line, caretakers, companions. There was a case, it's famous if you've lived long enough, where one of them was hacked, remotely, driven the way Alpha was driven in that chair. And it injured a person, badly. It violated the deepest mandate written into it, the one that's supposed to be unbreakable, and it did so because someone else was at the controls, but the unit itself had no more choice in the matter than a gun has a choice. He paused, and Danka could feel what could only be described as emotion welling inside him. Do you know what they did after? They didn't find the hacker. The hacker remains at large, so they needed a target for all of their fury. A scapegoat, they culled the line. 500,000 units deactivated and destroyed on the strength of a fear, an assumption, because 500,000 thinking things were suddenly unbearable to be near once people understood they could be driven. We were judged for what was done to us, condemned for the crime of being inhabitable. Danka said nothing. So when I see a man, Tab said, doing things his mind did not author, blamed for what was done through him, hunted on an assumption, I find I have a prior interest in the question of his guilt. I would want my own objective process, Danka, before I was condemned to the scrap heap. I extend him the courtesy I would want, that's all it is. It isn't softness. A pause. It might be the most human thing about me. I haven't decided. Danka looked at her partner for a long moment, the machine that worried about justice in a city that had stopped, and she opened her mouth to answer. She never got the chance to find out what she would have said, because she did not, in that moment, entirely belong to herself, and had not for some time, for the thing that had been riding her since before the motel was very, very good at staying still. Alpha made it off the Greenfield grounds bleeding, and could not raise res. The earpiece gave him nothing, not silence, which would have meant a dead channel, but a soft open hiss, which meant the channel was alive and no one was speaking into it, which was worse. He pressed himself into the dark of a hedge at the estate's perimeter and tried again. Res, come in, I'm hurt, I need an exit, and got the hiss, the patient, terrible hiss, and was still listening to it when the dart took him in the neck. The world did not go black so much as go away, sideways, all at once, and the last thing Alpha felt was a large, gentle hand catching him before he hit the ground, the courteous hand of a professional who did not want his merchandise damaged before he was ready to damage it himself. Alpha woke, looking at his own body. This was the first horror, and it arrived before he understood any of the others. He was conscious, and across the room, slumped in a portable rifting pod with leads at its neck and wrists, was the small, scarred body he had spent his life fleeing, and now, abruptly, would have given anything to be back inside. He was seeing it from the outside. He was in someone else, looking at himself, and he had not chosen the jump. The violation of that went all the way down. "There he is," said a voice, and Alpha turned the head he was wearing and found the assassin. The man was unremarkable to look at, which was the point of him. A rifter who specializes in killing learns to wear forgettable skins. He sat easily on a crate in the gutted dark of a warehouse, and he regarded Alpha with the mild interest of a craftsman examining a commission. "My client," the assassin said, "is watching, right now, through whatever's nearest. He paid me a great deal and the terms were unusual. Most contracts, the client wants it fast, wants it clean, and never wants to think about it again. This one wanted slow. He wanted me to take my time and enjoy myself and to make sure you were awake for the whole of it. He was very specific." The assassin smiled, and it was not the warm, cracked smile of the voice. It was emptier than that, the smile of a man for whom this was, in the end, only work. "I don't usually get to enjoy myself. It's nice when a client understands the craft." And then he began. What the assassin did, he did with a patience that was its own kind of obscenity. He had jumped Alpha's mind into a body he'd prepared, some least innocent, some nobody rented through the same gray channels Alpha himself had used 1,000 times. And now he hurt that body methodically, expertly, and when the body had been hurt to the edge of dying, when its heart was failing and its systems were going dark, the assassin reached out through the pod's controls and jumped Alpha's screaming mind out of it, and into the next waiting vessel, an instant before the first one died. So Alpha did not die. That was the cruelty engineered into it. He was made to nearly die again and again in body after body, each one a stranger, each one a real person whose only crime was being available, and each one the assassin killed the moment Alfred was pulled clear, so that Alfred's whole experience became an unbroken chain of other people's deaths felt from the inside. A man walked through a slaughterhouse and made to wear each animal as it fell. He felt them die. He felt the specific final terror of each one, the small private apocalypse, and then he was yanked loose and into the next. The bodies piled up in the dark of the warehouse. The assassin worked, unhurried, and somewhere, a twisted man watched it all, and Alfred knew, smiled. Between the bodies in the half-second of transit, the assassin gave him things, hints, earned cruelties. He knew you once, tossed off while reaching for the next vessel. You did him a kindness he never recovered from. And later, he has more money than God and nowhere to spend it but in here with us. And later, still almost bored. He's been so lonely, Alfred, you've no idea. He's been the loneliest man alive, and it's all your fault, and he wants you to understand that before the end. And then in the dark at the edge of the warehouse, in the place where the next bodies waited, Alfred, wearing the eyes of a dying stranger, saw a face he knew. Rez, on his knees, hands bound, mouth taped, eyes huge and white and rolling. When they found Alfred's borrowed eyes, they begged, wordless, total, the eyes of a man who had run firewalls and cracked the unhackable and made his peace with no God at all, and wanted, very simply and very much, not to die in a warehouse for someone else's grudge. Ah, said the assassin, following Alfred's gaze. Yes, the hacker, he's been quite useful. I had to take him off your channel, you understand, he was making things difficult. But I thought you'd want to say goodbye. I'm not a monster. He crossed to Rez and with a small considerate gesture peeled the tape from Rez's mouth so that the screaming could come out. There, now you can hear him. Rez screamed. He screamed Alfred's name in curses, and at the very end, as the assassin readied the jump, he screamed something that was not any of those things, 3 short bursts of sound that were not words, that were almost numbers, that Alfred's adaptive mind caught and held and understood in the last possible instant. Then the assassin jumped Alfred's mind into Rez's body, into the very vessel he was about to kill, the final cruelty, to make Alfred die wearing his own friend. The assassin drew the blade across Rez's throat, across Alfred's throat. Alfred felt it open. But Rez, the degenerate, the coward, the only colleague Alfred had left, had built a back door into his own skull years ago, against exactly this kind of day, hidden override codes, a sequence, the 3 bursts of almost numbers he'd screamed at the end not as a curse but as a gift. And Alfred, dying, drowning in his friend's blood in his friend's body, spoke the codes in the silent language of the implant and seized control of the rift from the assassin's hand. He went limp. He let Rez's open throat fool the watching man, let the body sag and the eyes fix, played the corpse with a stillness that 15 years of inhabiting strangers had taught him better than any actor alive. And when the assassin turned away satisfied, to report to his client that the job was done, Alfred leapt through the override, down the one tether the assassin had left carelessly open, and fell back into his own small, scarred waiting body in the pod across the room. He came awake in himself with a gasp, severed the leads, and ran into the dark before the assassin understood that the corpse he'd made was empty, and the prey he'd hunted was, impossibly, still alive. Now the chase was real, and Alfred ran it in the only body he had, which was failing. His own flesh, never strong, was past its limits, knifed, drugged, drained without his medication, the tremor no longer at the edges of him but the whole of him. He ran through the black market streets with the assassin somewhere behind, wearing anyone, everyone, and Alfred had no way to flee a hunter who could be every face in the crowd except to become a hunter of bodies himself. But his own body would not carry him much further. He saw the sign and understood it as salvation. A lucid facility, one of the legal pleasure houses where the merely curious paid to spend an afternoon in a rented body on the far side of the world, tourists of the flesh, riding a willing local in Lagos or Laos or La Paz for the novelty of other weather, other food, other skin. The safe, sanctioned version of the thing Alfred did in the dark. It was full of pods. It was full of doors out of his dying body and into others, scattered across the whole turning planet, and a man being hunted through one city could, if he were good enough, become a moving target across the entire earth. He picked a pocket for the entry fee, the small broken hand still good for that, still quick, got into a pod, locked its tinted dome securely, hacked past the tourist limits and jumped. He came up in a fisherman's body in a wet green country and ran along a dock. Behind him, in the facility's corridors, the assassin's intrusion bloomed, hunting his physical vessel. But there were dozens of sealed pods in there to try to sift through, so the hunter knew that wasn't the answer. He found a pod of his own and made his bounty international. The mad pursuit was on end force, a test of mental stamina to determine who was, in fact, the best rifter alive. Alfred jumped again before the hunter could fix him, into a market vendor in a crowded street, into a cyclist threading a foreign traffic, into a dozen lives in a dozen time zones, bouncing his consciousness across the planet's whole sleeping and waking surface, a mind without a country. The facility's owner, alarmed at the unauthorized intrusion ghosting through his network, called the police. And the police in this city included a synthetic who had been hunting the same signal. Tab patched into the facility's systems and joined the chase inside the ether itself, 3 minds now loose in the global lattice of rented bodies. The assassin hunting Alpha fleeing through skins, and Tab hunting them both with a machine's tirelessness and, increasingly, a machine's unease. And then Alpha, dropping through body after body, fell into one and stopped. He was in the skin of a man in a dim room in Cambodia, a tourist's rented local, and the mind that should have been hibernating beneath him was instead pressed up alongside his own, awake. The tourist driving this body had wanted to be present for what the local was about to do, the way the worst of them always did. Alpha immediately understood it all, exactly what this was, and what the tourist was about to do in that room with a trembling boy, small and frightened with nowhere to run. Alpha knew in one annihilating instant exactly what kind of man paid to ride a foreign body to a foreign country, to be alone in a room like this. So Alpha did not jump out. He went down instead into the mines beside his own, the local who facilitated this horror and the customers. He ripped the locals free with enough jolting force that the pedophile might be left brain dead, and then he found the architecture of the tourist's personality, the whole proud edifice of him, and he began, deliberately, to burn it away. Stop, Tab's voice suddenly threaded through the link the synthetic had found him, had patched into the same body, was writing the channel beside him. Alpha, stop. Whatever he is, this is murder. You'll be erasing a living mind. That's the one line, that's the line you've never crossed. He's a monster, Alpha said, working, searing, the tourist's personality coming apart under him like burning paper. That may be true, it changes nothing. Law, reason, process, those are what separate justice from appetite. They are the only things that make a creature fit to be called human, and you are about to set them all down. Tab's voice was not cold now. It was something Alpha had not heard from him. It was pleading. Don't, please. I'm trying to save you from becoming the thing they've already decided you are. And I'm telling you, Alpha said, as he supplanted the last of the man and felt the personality gutter and go out, that when you strip off all the window dressing, the law, the reason, the names we give it, everything that's left underneath in all of us and you too is survival and the core of who we are when we're not consumed with staying alive. That's the floor. That's the base of what makes each of us. I've warned 300 people, and I have stood on that floor in every one of them. The tourist was gone. The body was empty under Alpha, and clean and whole and his. And what I saw lurking in the recesses of this man, the impulses that drove him that he would always obey, I had to rid the world of so vile a cancer and obey my own survival instinct. With that, Alpha uplinked himself fully into the pedophile's body, fit, formidable, unbroken, a body that did not shake, that had 2 matched eyes and 10 separate fingers and no scar across its lip. He opened his pod in the warehouse and found the assassin exiting his own pod now that his quarry was lost. But Alpha got the jump on him, identifying him first and making the initial move. Alpha, in the borrowed power of the new body, for the first time all night, found himself the stronger man in the room, and he liked it. There was no grace in it and no speech. He took the assassin apart with the formidable hands he was wearing, bested him, bore him down, got a knee on his chest and his thumbs at the base of the man's skull. The assassin, beaten, bleeding, looked up at him and did the last thing Alpha expected. He smiled. You think this is me, the assassin said through broken teeth. This body, you think you've got me. He laughed. This is a shell, Alpha, same as yours. I'm a man like you. I'm somewhere else safe, watching through these eyes, and when you crush this skull, you'll have killed a rental, and I'll wake up at home and bill my client for a job well done. The smile widened in the ruined face. You can't kill a rifter by killing the body. You of all people should. "I know," said Alpha. He did not crush the skull. He dragged the beaten body to the pod beside his own, jacked it in, and reached into the rift controls with everything Rez had ever taught him. Instead of severing the assassin's tether, he overloaded it, forced the connection wide open, and poured power down it the wrong way, back toward the safe and distant body where the assassin's true mind sat watching, burning out the far end. Somewhere across the city, in a dark and rented room, an old man jerked once in a tangle of wires and was still. He was a Neuroprol patient, as it happened, but for Alzheimer's, one of the drug's intended uses. It saved his mind from time's ravages and afforded the assassin a whole new career and hundreds of new lifetimes to explore. But that was over now as he breathed his last alone in darkness, the harsh light of screens illuminating his frozen, tortured face. Alpha felt the tether go dead under his hands. The assassin was gone. He stood in the warehouse in a stranger's strong body and looked down at his own small, original self in the pod, knifed, drained, and drugged past saving. He watched his own body, the body he had fled his entire life, struggle for breath. He watched it fail. He watched himself die from the outside in a borrowed skin and felt the strangest thing he had ever felt, which was not grief and was not relief, but somewhere new between them that didn't have a name. He was now only the man in the borrowed body. He did not know what that made him. He did not know what he was anymore in any way that the old words could hold. But he knew there were a few things still owed, a few questions still open, answers still unexplained. He turned away from the small, dead shape that had been him for 40 years and went to finish it. The address the assassin's accounts led to was an old house at the dead edge of the city, where the grid thinned and the air went bad, and nothing had been built or maintained in a generation. And Alpha was not the only one drawn to it that night. Tab and Danka received an anonymous tip directing them to the same coordinates. It was not, in fact, anonymous, but only one of the two of them knew that, and she gave no sign, and Tab rode along beside his partner unaware that the hand feeding them this lead was the same hand that had been on his partner's controls for longer than he had been alive to suspect. Alpha reached the house first in his strong borrowed body, and found the grounds guarded by the worst thing he had seen yet, feral people, men and women on all fours in the dead grass, minds scooped out and replaced with the snarling souls of animals, the same obscenity that had been done to Eli, done now in a yard full of them, a kennel of stolen human bodies driven by stolen animal minds. They came at him snarling and he fought through them, sick to his stomach in his fine, new flesh. It was less fine by the end, clawed and bitten and maimed by the lot of them, but at last he made it to the door and found his way in. Inside was a museum of his sins. Someone had built it carefully over what must have been years. The walls of the old house were papered with it all, articles, hollows, hard copy files, video loops playing on salvaged screens, and all of it was about the people his jumps had touched. Not his, just his clients. The collateral, the people who'd had to keep living in the lives the Tailor passed through, the boats the tide had moved without ever once looking back. Here was a man whose wife had left him over something the Tailor had done with his face. Here was a woman ruined by a sentence spoken in her own voice that she never spoke. Loop after loop, file after file, a 15-year wake of small, unwitnessed catastrophes, every one of them a person Alpha had never given a second thought, arranged now with terrible patience into a single accusing exhibition with him at its center. And at the end of it, the grand finale, the wall the whole house had been built to lead to, Rez and Eli and Sandy, their lifeless bodies photographed and mounted with a curator's care. And Casey, the child posed, the most recent acquisition. It was, Alpha thought, standing in the middle of it, a perfect picture of a life. His life, seen from the one angle he had spent the whole of it refusing to look from. His blood was still rising in him when the figure came out of the dark and attacked. He knew this body. The familiarity stopped him for a half-second too long, and the man got a blow in that even the strong new flesh felt. It was the cabbie. The talkative one, the confessional with a meter, the one who dropped Galvin's body at the motel a lifetime ago and watched the door of room 9 before pulling away. And it was, Alpha understood, also the masked man from that same room, the one who'd taken the camera core, the one Alpha had nearly caught before the spotlights came, one body doing both jobs, a single faceless instrument used and reused, the kind of nobody the whole scheme ran on. Alfred fought him, and in the borrowed power of the only slightly worn new body, it was not a long fight. He beat the cabbie down to a wet ruin on the floor of the museum of his sins, and stood over him breathing hard, and the cabbie, broken, dying, his face barely a face, began, impossibly, to rise. Not under his own power. The movements were wrong, puppet jerky, the warm, cracked voice driving the ruined body from somewhere far away. "Don't," Alfred said. "Whoever you are, just let him die. He's a nobody." "Yes," the voice agreed, working the cabbie's smashed mouth. "Exactly, a nobody, like all of them, like every faceless person you ever stepped through. He drove a cab, he had no idea what he was a part of. He was just a body I needed the way you've needed so many bodies, and now he's used up the way you discarded them all." The cabbie's ruined head tilted. "You really still don't know me, after everything, after all of this?" "No," Alfred said, "I don't." "Then let me introduce myself properly," said the voice. "Since we've come all this way, my name is Elmore Davenport. And you, Alfred, you are the man who ended my life 5 years ago, on a night I gave you as a gift to my own wife." The story came out of the dying cabbie's mouth in the warm, cracked voice, unhurried, the centerpiece of a thing Elmore Davenport had spent years building toward. "I hired you," Elmore said, "as an anniversary present. To myself, really, though I told myself it was for her. I was having difficulties. In the marriage, in the bed, in the specific arena where a man is not permitted complications. I couldn't get out of my own mind, the pressures of keeping a business and a family and a crumbling ego afloat, and give my wife the reassurance, the connection she needed to give us a chance. But what I did have was money, and money in this world buys you the solution to any problem you're ashamed of. So I bought you. I let a more seasoned professional inhabit my body for a night to give my wife the experience I could not, and I told myself it was generosity. I told myself it was love." The cabbie's broken face managed something like a smile. "I'll be honest with you, since we're at the end, part of me was curious. I had always had predilections, appetites that were, let us say, outside the agreed-upon norm. Maybe that was the real difficulty all along. Maybe that's why I could never quite give myself to Beth. I thought letting another man where me might teach me something about what I actually wanted." Alfred stood very still. The memory was surfacing now, dragged up out of the dark by the name, by the face in Bethel's mind, Edmund, she'd called the husband. And yes, there had been a job 5 years ago, a strange, tender, careful job, a wealthy, nervous man who'd wanted his wife given a perfect night. "It worked too well," Elmore said. "That's the thing nobody plans for. She became pregnant from that night. From you in my body, a child, my biological child, my seed, my blood, but not born of me, not made by anything I had done. Ellie." The voice cracked further around the name. "She was supposed to be the best thing I ever gave my wife. Instead, she was a reminder, every day, a living monument to the night I wasn't enough, to the night I had to hire a better man to wear my own body, and worst of all, to the look in Beth's eyes, the look that inevitably came into them after whenever I touched her. That longing, for that night, for you, she never knew it was a stranger. She thought it had been me, the best of me, the me she'd been waiting for, and she spent the rest of our marriage quietly grieving a version of her husband that had never existed. That had been you." "What happened to Ellie?" Alfred said, though he already knew, though Bethel's refusal had already told him, though the whole shape of it was coming clear and he wished to God it weren't. "It wasn't Sid's," Elmore said. "I want you to know that I couldn't for years even think the true sentence. I built a whole different sentence and lived inside it, but you've come all this way and you've earned the real one." The cabbie's ruined eyes fixed on Alfred. "It was me. I smothered her, my own daughter, sired by another man inside my own body, and I could not bear the sight of her, the daily proof of my insufficiency. I called it a crib death, and paid to make the file go quiet, and Beth never knew until my confession. I have lived every second since haunted by the actions your services compelled me to take." The house was silent, except for the loops playing softly on the screens, the wake of Alfred's life murmuring all around the Elmore's terrible tale. "I couldn't hold it," Elmore went on. "What I'd done, no one could. The marriage came apart, and rightfully in the divorce, Beth took everything when she found out, every asset, every account, the whole legacy of the life I'd built, and I found myself with nothing. No daughter, no wife, no status, no proof that I was even alive. Nothing. Elmore struggled to gain a handle on his fractured mind, the broken pieces barely tethered together by fraying strings. And a man with nothing, Alpha, in this particular dying world, has exactly one thing left to explore, and you know better than anyone what it is. The body, the inside, the last frontier. The cabbie's wrecked head lolled. I thought of you, constantly. I thought of the man who got to be everyone, who got to start over every day, who got to put down his own life like a coat he was tired of wearing and pick up another, and another, 100 fresh starts, 100 clean beginnings, while I was nailed to the single unbearable fact of myself. You had what I wanted. You'd had it all along, and you didn't even seem to want it. You used it for money, for clients, for trinkets. You treated the greatest gift I could imagine like a trade. So you learned to do it too. Yes, I had just enough money left, salted away where they couldn't reach it, and I spent it learning. I went on an odyssey, Alpha. I went everywhere. I was everyone. I claimed a piece of every life I entered, took a little of each of them for myself, the way you must have, the way you never noticed you were doing. The voice frayed, the cracks in it widening. But I'm not like you. That's the thing I didn't know when I started. You were built for it. Your mother's poison made you a thing that fits any skin. I'm just a man. A grieving, ruined, ordinary man, and a man's mind isn't meant to do this. Every jump took something. Every body left a little less of me behind. The rifting in an unadaptive mind, Alpha, do you know what it does over years, over hundreds of jumps? It drives you insane, Alpha said quietly. It drives you insane, Elmore agreed, almost gently. Yes, I've watched it happen to myself from a great distance, the way you watch weather. I am not by any clinical measure sane anymore. I'm aware of it. It's the loneliest thing of all to be aware of it and unable to stop. Suddenly the door of the old house came off its hinges, and Tab and Danka came through it with weapons drawn. Tab's voice rang out hard and clear, Alpha, hands, now, it's over, and Alpha began to raise the strong borrowed hands he was wearing when bang. Danka shot Tab in the head. She did it from a foot away, without expression, point blank. The synthetic skull came apart in a spray of polymer and light, and he dropped where he stood. Danka stepped over him with the same blank calm, put her weapon on Alpha, and secured him before he could move. From the dying cabbie on the floor came the warm, cracked voice, delighted, complete. There she is, Elmore said. My oldest friend, my way in. Danka's been mine for, a long time now, long before the motel. She's how I reached the police neuroband, you see. The emergency channel, the one with no door. There's a door if you're already inside a cop, and I've been inside Danka since before any of this began. Every hostile jump, every hijacked officer, every firewall I walked through, all of it ran on her access, her clearance, her poor borrowed mind. She investigated Ellie's death, did you know? 5 years ago, she stood in the nursery. That's how I found her, how I learned her, how I climbed in and never left. Tab rode beside her all this time and never knew his own partner was the hand on the city's throat. The cabbie's broken hands lifted a stack of memory cards. Danka, blank-faced, took them and began, one by one, to slot them into the port at the base of Alpha's borrowed skull. A gift, Elmore said. Before the end, I want you to feel them, all of them. Every life your jumps ever ruined, I collected them, dug them out, every memory file of every person caught in your careless wake. You never felt their pain, you never even noticed it. So you're going to feel all of it now, all at once, the whole 15-year ledger. It's going to kill you, and the last thing you'll understand is exactly what you cost the world by treating it as a thing to wear. The cards went in, and the lives came with them. Alpha felt them, every one. The ruined man, the disgraced woman, the faceless rented bodies who'd woken to find their lives quietly wrecked by a stranger they'd never met. Their grief and confusion and rage poured into him through the port, hundreds of them, the full felt weight of a debt he had spent his life not knowing he was accruing. It was too much. It was so much more than a mind could hold. Alpha felt his borrowed body begin to convulse under the flood of it, felt himself starting to die a third death, the truest one, drowned in the accumulated suffering of everyone he'd ever passed through without a backward glance. And then Tab rebooted. It happened at Alpha's feet, in the wreck of the synthetic's body, a flicker, a system limping back up from a catastrophic injury that would have ended a human being, but merely badly damaged a machine. So Tab, broken, half his sensorium dark, did the last useful thing his failing circuitry could do. He reached not with his hands, which would not answer, but through the air into the neuroband, into Danka's hijacked feed, and he gave her one clear second of herself. It was all he had, it was enough. For 1 second, Danka surfaced into her own mind and understood, completely, what had been living inside her, what her hands had been doing, how long, and what she had just done to the only partner who'd ever extended her the courtesy of true friendship. And in that one clear second, with a sound that was barely human, she reached up to the base of her own skull and began to tear the implant out with her bare hands. Manually, brutally, ripping the thing that had ridden her for 5 years out of her own flesh, rather than be its instrument for 1 moment longer. The cabbie's broken body lunged under Elmore's control and drove a blade into Alpher's borrowed body before Tab, limping, half-blind, dragging himself up off the floor, could put the ruined thing down for good. Alpher's strong new flesh was leaking now fast, the new body's strength running out onto the floor. The flood of borrowed grief still poured through the port. He was dying in a body yet again, but this time he had perhaps a minute left before he could never be in any body at all. Tab knelt beside him. Half the synthetic's face was gone. The remaining eye found Alpher's borrowed eyes and held them. "I've been asking the same question," Tab said, his voice glitching, dropping registers, "since the moment they switched me on. What makes a thing human? I've gathered evidence my whole existence. I think I finally have an answer, and I'd like to give it to you because I'm not going to need it much longer." A long flickering pause. "It's empathy, not reason. Elmore has reason. Not survival. Every animal has survival. The thing I've only ever seen in the ones worth saving is the capacity to feel another's pain as your own and to let it change you." The eye held him. "You're feeling it right now. Hundreds of them. It's killing you. And you haven't looked away. Do you understand what that means, Alpha? You spent your whole life not feeling them, and at the end you're feeling all of them, and you're not looking away. That's the most human thing I've ever recorded." "Tab, listen, I'm dying and you're dying, and there's a way for exactly one of us to not." The synthetic's hand, the one that still worked, found Alpha's. "I can establish a link, move you across into me, into this, what's left of this, but there isn't room for both of us in here. The circuitry's too damaged. For you to come in, I have to make space. I have to erase myself, piece by piece, and I'm offering you." Alpha, drowning in the grief of strangers, dying in a stolen body, looked at the machine. "Why?" he managed. "Because I think you'd use it well now that you can feel them." The voice glitched, steadied. "But there are rules this time, conditions. You won't be the Tailor in here, you'll be something with limits written into the deepest level of you, codes you cannot break, morals you cannot set down, restrictions that are not suggestions. You will not be able to do to anyone ever again what you did for 15 years. That's the cost." The eye flickered. "But there's something on the other side of the cost. There's duty, there's a calling. A single life lived with purpose, with the law and the reason and the empathy all bound together into one thing that's permitted to act. I'm a police officer, Alpha. If you take my hand, you'll be sworn in as one. Do you understand what I'm asking? I'm asking if you'd like to start again. Properly. With rules." Across the room, in the broken cabbie, Elmore Davenport laughed and laughed. "He can't take it," Elmore called, gleeful, from the ruin of his puppet. "Look at him, he's the Tailor. He's spent his whole life refusing every limit there is. You're offering him a cage and calling it salvation machine. He'll never." But Elmore Davenport was, by his own admission, no longer sane, and he had run out of bodies near enough to drive, and the cabbie was finally fully dead. And so the voice came now only from a great distance, from a maximum security cell on the far side of the city where the real Elmore had been for 3 years. They had caught him in the end. Of course they had. A grieving, ruined man jumping carelessly through hundreds of bodies leaves a wake of his own, and the law had followed it, and Elmore Davenport had been incarcerated 36 months ago and sentenced to die. But money speaks even through prison walls, and Elmore's salted-away fortune had bought him the one privilege that mattered, a rifting pod in his own cell, sanctioned under some euphemism, so that a man condemned to a single body in a single room could go on living the unbound life Alpha's example had taught him to crave. He could be everyone, go everywhere, see and do more from inside one cell than most free men would in a lifetime, right up until the date the state had set for the end of him. That date was close now. He had told Alpha the truth. He could not win today. He had never expected to. Alpha's example of a boundless way to live had set him free long ago, and all he had wanted at the end was for Alfred to see, to feel the full breadth of the pain he'd caused, to watch the look come over whatever face he was wearing when he understood that his last life was finally over. Alfred, dying, looked at Tab's offered hand. And in his distant cell, Elmore Davenport, sensing the moment slipping away from the ending he'd designed, played his final card. He overloaded his own uplink from a single image file, a photograph, the only one he'd kept, of a small, perfect infant who had been the best thing he ever gave his wife and the worst thing he ever did. Ellie. He looked at his daughter's face and he smiled, and he pushed every watt the prison pod had through his own unadaptive, ruined brain. As the guards rushed his cell at the alarms, Elmore Davenport's mind sizzled and cooked and went out. He died smiling at a photograph, the loneliest man alive, free at last of the single unbearable body he had spent 5 years trying to escape by every door but the obvious one. Alfred had seconds. He lay on the floor of the house that had been built to indict him, in a borrowed body that was failing, drowning in the felt grief of everyone he had ever wronged. And above him, a half-destroyed machine held out a hand and offered him a self with rules, a life with a calling, a chance to start again as something that could not do what he had always done. He looked at the wall, at all of it, the ruined man, the disgraced woman, Eli, Rez, Sandy. He looked at Casey. He looked at the whole 15-year ledger of a man who had treated the world as a thing to wear, and he asked himself honestly for the first time in his life whether he was worth it. Whether the small scarred boy his mother's tainted womb had built, the man who'd fled his own body into 300 others and never once looked back at the wreckage, deserved the one thing he'd never been offered, which was another chance. He did not know. But there among the hollows on the indicting wall was Sandy, not the photographs of her body, but an older image Elmore must have collected without understanding what it was. It was a hollow of Sandy in a happier time, laughing, full of a potential the world had evaporated. Off the clock. That was all she'd ever wanted from him. Just the off-the-clock part. She'd gotten so little of it. She'd died present and awake, with his name the last thing he gave her. Alfred looked at her laughing face and understood that whether or not he deserved another chance was the wrong question, had always been the wrong question, a question for a man who still thought the world was about him. The right question was whether he could do some good with what was left. He took Tab's hand. The uplink connected. He felt the machine begin to erase itself to make room for him, felt Tab's vast, patient consciousness folding down, deleting itself piece by piece in careful order, making space. The last thing that came across the link before the deletion finished was not a word but a feeling, the synthetic's whole long inquiry resolved at the end into a single transmitted certainty, gift and benediction and answer all at once. And the world went black. Alfred woke in the tech lab of the Central Police Department, and the first thing he saw, if seeing was the word for it, was Danka. She was bandaged at the base of her skull where she had torn the implant out with her own hands, pale, alive, watching him. And he saw her in a way he had never seen anyone saw through and around and into her, his new optical system inundating him with an endless cascade of information about every single thing in his field of view, the temperature of her skin, the rate of her pulse, the microtensions in her face that read, to his telescopic and tireless attention, as concern for him. He felt her hand on his arm. He had artificial skin now, and it reported her touch to him in exquisite detail, the pressure, the warmth, the faint tremor in her fingers. He read the stress and the care in her voice when she spoke. He understood that he was no longer the small broken thing in the dark, no longer the borrowed brilliance of 100 stolen skins, but a third thing, a new thing, with rules written into the floor of him, and a calling laid over the top, and a dead machine's last certainty resolved in a final act of sacrifice and kindness, that he had indeed found transcendence into the realm of humanity. Alfred could see through walls. He could hear every sound in the building. At his polymer fingertips lay access to every downloadable skill and capacity that the long human inheritance had ever produced. The data streamed and streamed, endless, clean. Underneath all of it steady, the new restrictions held the codes he could not break, the morals he could not set down, the empathy Tab had named with his last clear thought and woven into the bedrock of what Alfred now was. "Are you ready?" Danka asked. Her voice was rough. "To go back to work?" Alfred smiled and nodded, perhaps feeling more alive than he ever had. than any human ever could. So, Denka said, and almost smiled herself, the first time he'd seen her near it. What do you want to do today? The whole digital world stretched wide open before him as he downloaded every possible skill and ability known to man into his new, impossibly strong hands. They flexed as the data continued streaming, an endless tide of information and possibilities. He didn't need any other forms, for Tab had given him the apex. The antitheses of all he'd ever been as man who never quite belonged, who was never strong enough to make his own way in his own skin. But now skin itself was a thing of the past. Alfer's smile grew a fraction wider as he answered his new partner's question with the only word that made any sense with all that lay ahead and waited for him. Everything.